Imagine your son is standing in front of the house and an HOA man in a fake police uniform points a gun at him. Your heart freezes. But what that cop did not know was that your son is a Special Forces soldier. The next moments changed everything. The morning was peaceful, almost unnaturally so. Our street had a kind of silence that only comes in the suburbs. No honking horns, no shouting vendors, only the distant hum of lawnmowers and the occasional bark of a dog. My son, Ryan, was standing in front of our house, watering the small flower beds I had planted years ago. It was his first week home after another long deployment. He looked different this time. Calmer, maybe, but with a heaviness in his eyes that only soldiers carry. I was inside, sipping coffee, watching him through the kitchen window. That's when I noticed the black SUV creeping into the neighborhood. It stopped right in front of our driveway. At first, I thought it was a real police unit. The man who stepped out wore a navy blue uniform complete with a badge, utility belt, and even a sidearm. But something was off. The badge glinted wrong under the sunlight, the shirt didn't fit, and the patches were cheap iron-ons instead of embroidered. I had seen enough real law enforcement in my time to know this wasn't it. He walked with the swagger of someone who wanted power, but never earned it. His hand rested on the holster like he was itching to use it. He called out in a voice that tried too hard to sound authoritative. "Hey, step away from the property. You're in violation of HOA Code 11.3. Ryan turned his head slowly, still holding the hose. Calm, controlled, almost uninterested. "I think you've got the wrong house," he said. The man snapped. "Don't talk back. I'm giving you an order. Step away now or I'll make you." I froze at the window. He wasn't a cop. He was one of those HOA enforcers, the type that thought their neighborhood rules were federal law. But now, he wasn't just handing out warning slips, he was dressed like an officer and armed. Ryan raised one eyebrow. "You're with the HOA? Since when do they issue guns?" That's when the fake cop's face twisted with anger. He pulled the pistol halfway out of his holster and pointed it straight at my son's chest. The world seemed to stop. My heart slammed in my chest. 100 thoughts hit me at once. Should I call the police? Should I run outside? Or should I yell? But before I could decide, Ryan's body shifted. Most people, when a gun is pointed at them, panic. They raise their hands, plead, and freeze. But Ryan wasn't most people. He had spent years in Special Forces. He had trained for moments like this, ambushes, split-second life-or-death decisions, men with weapons and bad intentions. His eyes narrowed, reading every twitch in the man's stance. His grip on the hose loosened, water spilling onto the pavement. His shoulders lowered slightly as if relaxed. But I knew that stance. It was the calm before violence. The fake cop shouted again. "On the ground, now. If you don't follow HOA rules, you get punished." Neighbors had begun peeking through blinds. A curtain shifted across the street. A door cracked open next door. But nobody came out. Nobody wanted to be part of what was about to unfold. Ryan slowly raised one hand, palm outward, as if to comply. The fake cop smirked, stepping closer. His finger brushed the trigger guard. He thought he had control. He thought he was the predator. He had no idea he was standing 3 feet from a trained wolf. In one explosive motion, Ryan moved. The hose dropped and his left hand shot forward, slamming into the gun hand, forcing it upward. A deafening bang tore through the air, the bullet sailing harmlessly into the sky. Birds scattered from trees. Dogs barked. Before the fake cop could recover, Ryan twisted his wrist, disarming him in less than a second. The gun clattered to the pavement. Ryan's elbow followed, driving into the man's chest with a force that sent him staggering backward. I gasped at the window, my coffee forgotten spilling across the counter. The fake cop wheezed, clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock. He looked at Ryan, at the gun now in Ryan's hand, and at the calm fury in my son's eyes. Ryan didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His voice was low, almost quiet. "You point a weapon at me again, you won't get a second chance." The man stumbled backward toward his SUV. His bravado was gone, replaced by raw fear. He scrambled inside and slammed the door shut, tires screeching as he sped away down the street. For a moment, the neighborhood was silent again. Only the sound of the hose water dripping onto the driveway filled the air. I ran outside, heart racing. "Ryan, are you okay?" He handed me the pistol. "This isn't standard issue. It's a cheap replica converted for live rounds. Dangerous but sloppy. He shook his head. He wasn't a cop. Not even close. HOAs are playing games they don't understand. I looked at him, trying to steady my breathing. You think this was sanctioned? The HOA sent him. Ryan's eyes hardened. Yeah, and they'll be back. But next time, they'll regret stepping foot here. What I didn't know was that this was only the beginning. That fake cop wasn't acting alone. He was part of something bigger. A power play by an HOA board that had gotten too used to controlling people. They thought they could intimidate us. They thought they could scare my son. They had no idea what kind of war they had just started. That night the house felt heavier. Even after dinner, even after Ryan reassured me that the situation was under control, I couldn't shake the image of that gun pointed at his chest. My son sat quietly at the table, arms folded, his gaze fixed on nothing. I had seen that look before. It was the stare of a man replaying scenarios in his head, running through possibilities, preparing for what might come next. I asked him, "Do you think he'll be back?" Ryan didn't answer immediately. He finally said, "Men like that don't act alone." He wasn't just some random lunatic. He was too bold, too confident. That means someone sent him, and he thought there'd be no consequences. "The HOA," I said, almost spitting the word. Ryan nodded. "And if they sent one, they'll send more. People like that test boundaries. When intimidation fails, they escalate." Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the house and every sound of tires in the street made me tense. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat across my lap. Ryan, on the other hand, went through quiet routines, checking doors, windows, and the perimeter of the house. His training showed in every step. Calm, methodical, prepared. By morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Whispers spread fast. Neighbors glanced at us differently. Some were sympathetic, others cautious like we were radioactive. By the afternoon, a notice was taped to our mailbox. Violation: unauthorized landscaping, improper fencing, failure to comply with HOA security inspection. Fine, $2,500. I crumpled the paper in my fist. They're hiding behind paperwork now? Ryan took it from me, studied it, and smirked. This isn't about landscaping. This is a message. They're pushing for control. He placed the paper on the table and smoothed it out. But they made a mistake. They think this is about lawns and fences. They don't realize they pointed a loaded gun at the wrong family. Later that day, another SUV rolled into the neighborhood. This one wasn't disguised as police. It bore the HOA's logo, neat and corporate. 3 men stepped out in pressed polo shirts, clipboards in hand, pretending to be inspectors. But their posture gave them away. Too stiff, too alert. They weren't here to inspect. They were here to intimidate. I watched from the porch as they approached. Ryan stood next to me, arms crossed, expression unreadable. One of them, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses, spoke first. "We're here to conduct a security check." "Standard HOA procedure." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "Security check? Since when does a homeowners association have that authority?" The man smirked. "Since you failed to comply with community standards. Resistance will result in fines and enforcement." Ryan's voice was calm but sharp. "Enforcement like sending a fake cop with a gun? That kind of enforcement?" The man's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The others shifted uneasily. Ryan stepped forward, closing the space between them. "Listen carefully. You trespass on this property again, and you'll wish you hadn't. That's your one warning." The tall man's smirk faltered. He tried to maintain control. "You're making a mistake. The HOA board doesn't take kindly to threats." Ryan leaned in, close enough that the man stiffened. "Neither do I." The silence stretched for a long moment. Finally, the so-called inspectors backed away, retreating to their SUV. They drove off without another word. I let out a shaky breath. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Ryan shook his head. "No, they're testing us. Seeing how far they can push. They'll come back harder." That night, Ryan pulled out a small black notebook from his duffel bag. It wasn't standard issue. This was his personal field log. He began sketching maps of the neighborhood, noting entry points, sight lines, and cover spots. He walked me through it like he had done 100 times with his team overseas. Front entry here. Too exposed. The backyard's better. The fence line gives cover. If they try again, they'll use intimidation, maybe numbers. If they're smart, they'll come when it's dark. We need to be ready. I watched him work, equal parts proud and terrified. My son had fought enemies on foreign soil. Now he was preparing for war against a homeowners association. The absurdity would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. 2 nights later, his predictions proved right. At 11:47 p.m., headlights swept across the windows. 2 SUVs this time, engines idled. Doors opened. 4 men stepped out, dressed in black with no badges and no clipboards. This wasn't an inspection. Ryan was already moving. He killed the lights inside, signaling for silence. He gestured for me to stay low. Through the window, I watched the men approach, one carrying a flashlight, another gripping something that looked suspiciously like a crowbar. They reached the porch. One of them whispered, "Board says he needs to learn his place." Ryan's voice cut through the dark like a blade. "Step away from my door." The men froze. Flashlight beams darted. "Who's there?" Ryan opened the door slowly. He didn't hold a weapon, not yet. He didn't need to. His presence alone filled the night air with tension. "You've already broken the law once," he said coldly. Pointed a gun at me. "Tonight you cross this line, you won't walk away." The man with the crowbar shifted uncomfortably. "We're just here to deliver a message." Ryan stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the porch light. "Message received. Now here's mine. Tell your board this is the last time they set foot on this property." For a long moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, the men backed down. They retreated to their SUVs, engines roaring as they sped away into the night. The neighborhood went quiet again. Ryan closed the door, turned to me and said simply, "They'll regroup. They'll plan something bigger, and when they do, I'll be ready." I believed him. But I also knew the HOA had money, connections, and a taste for control. This was no longer a petty feud over grass height or fence color. This was war. The morning after the failed nighttime intimidation, our neighborhood felt different. A tension hung in the air, subtle but undeniable. Ryan didn't speak much at breakfast. He ate mechanically, eyes scanning the street as if expecting an ambush at any second. "I've seen their type before," he said finally. "They'll talk to the board. They'll regroup. This is bigger than a single incident." I frowned. "The board? You mean the whole HOA?" Ryan nodded. "Yes, they've probably called an emergency meeting. These people don't operate alone. They coordinate, plan, and escalate when things don't go their way." By mid-afternoon it became clear he was right. A convoy of black SUVs rolled slowly into the neighborhood, and at least 6 men in crisp polo shirts stepped out. They carried clipboards, phones, and tablets, but their demeanor screamed intimidation. This wasn't a casual inspection. It was a calculated display of force. Ryan watched from the front window, calm as ever. "They're trying to overwhelm us. They think numbers will scare me, or you. They're about to learn that intimidation doesn't work here." The lead man approached our front door, his posture rigid, trying to project authority. "We are authorized by the HOA board to conduct a full property inspection. Non-compliance will result in fines and legal action." Ryan opened the door, his presence alone turning the air heavy. "Full inspection? You mean harassment? I know why you're here." The man hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Ryan leaned slightly forward, eyes cold. "I warned the last guy who came here. You're standing on the same path. One step further and you'll regret it." I was inside, heart pounding but also amazed. I'd seen him in war zones, seen him disarm armed men in hostile territories, and now, on our quiet suburban street, he commanded the same respect and fear. The lead man swallowed hard, signaling the others to pause. "We're only following protocol." Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "Protocol? You pointed a gun at my house. You trespassed. You threatened me. You're not following protocol. You're committing assault." One of the other men tried to step forward, but Ryan's voice stopped him mid-stride. "Stay there. Don't move. You're outnumbered only by the mistakes you've made tonight." The men exchanged glances, tension rising. The lead man stepped back, holding his hands up. "The board says," Ryan cut him off. "The board can say whatever they want. But they don't live here. They don't know what they're walking into." It was then that Ryan signaled me to the side door. "We need to make sure the back is secure," he said. "They may try a flanking maneuver." Inside, he moved with precision, checking all entry points, setting simple but effective obstacles, and making sure every approach was controlled. He wasn't just reacting, he was planning. By the time the HOA men realized the house was more prepared than they expected, Ryan had taken positions visible through the windows, making it clear any aggressive move would be met instantly. The lead man, sensing his plan was failing, tried negotiation. "We can resolve this peacefully." "Let's not escalate," Ryan interrupted, voice like steel. "You escalated first. You brought guns, intimidation, and threats. This ends now on your terms. You leave and never return." The tension was palpable. The men hesitated, visibly shaken. They had underestimated a special forces soldier. They had underestimated the stakes. Finally, they retreated. SUVs backed up, engines roaring as they sped off. For a moment, silence returned. But this time, it wasn't calm. It was charged. Ryan turned to me, calm but firm. "They'll plan another move, bigger, coordinated. That's why we need to be proactive. I'll handle the tactical side. You need to gather evidence, cameras, witnesses, anything that can be used to hold them accountable legally." I nodded, still catching my breath. "You're sure we can handle them?" Ryan smiled faintly, almost wryly. "They don't know what they're dealing with, but they're about to find out." Over the next few days, Ryan set up surveillance, mapped all possible access points, and reviewed every past incident with HOA enforcers. It wasn't just about defense, it was psychological. He wanted them to understand that any move against us would be met with immediate consequences. Then came the message we'd been waiting for. An official letter from the HOA board, signed and delivered personally. They threatened legal action, fines, and public shaming. But it wasn't the threats that mattered. It was the tone. Desperate, shaky, exposed. Ryan read it carefully, then looked at me. This is their fear. They're realizing that bullying us won't work. Now, it's just a matter of time before they try something bigger to save face. I realized he was right. This wasn't just a fight about property lines or rules anymore. This was about control, pride, and power. And Ryan, trained for situations where lives depended on split-second decisions, was ready to ensure that we would come out on top. The next step would require careful planning, patience, and strategy. But one thing was certain. The HOA had underestimated us and underestimated the consequences of targeting the wrong family. And the war was far from over. By the time the sun set on the fourth day, the whole street felt like a battlefield. You could see it in the way people moved. Slower, eyes on the edges, conversations stopped when SUVs rolled by. Rumors spread. Some whispered about lawsuits. Others warned us to keep quiet. But Ryan's plan let none of that rattle him. He moved like someone who'd already seen worse and knew how to win. He called it simple. I called it brave. He called it precise. I called it terrifying. First, he built the stage. He installed cameras, cheap, discreet, and placed where they would catch faces and license plates. He ran wiring through the attic and hid signs that said the property was monitored. He replaced weak locks with ones that clicked solid and loud. He strengthened the back gate. He set up motion sensors that would flash lights and record any after-dark approach. Then he baited them. Ryan posted an edited social clip on the local neighborhood forum. The clip looked casual. Him in his backyard, tossing a football with a neighbor's kid, smiling, watering the plants. In the caption, he wrote nothing dramatic, just 2 words. All calm. The clip was meant to lure. It would suggest the house was relaxed and unguarded. It would make the HOA think their intimidation had worked. They took the bait. That night, just past midnight, 3 black SUVs rolled into the cul-de-sac, lights off. The engine whispers. Men climbed out, moving with the quiet of trained people. They carried equipment, bulldog clips, bolt cutters, and a crowbar. One man held a pistol against his waist, the muzzle tucked under a jacket. They split into teams and moved toward the back of the house like shadows. Inside, Ryan waited. He had rehearsed this in his head 1,000 times. He mapped their likely routes. He knew how they thought. He'd watched their camera work and seen their overconfidence in other runs. He counted on it. When the first man slipped under the fence and reached for the gate latch, the motion sensor woke the yard in a flash. A harsh LED strip flared. The man froze. He hit the gate with his shoulder, then scrambled to duck out of the light. 2 more sensors tripped. Ryan's cameras tracked their faces. He fed the live footage to a laptop in his hands and to a tablet in mine. I watched, breath held as the men fumbled. They were not prepared for noise. They were not prepared for being seen. Their calm faltered. Radios hissed. They conferred in whispers that sounded shaky over the live feed. Then the sirens came. Not police sirens. Not yet. Ryan had called in a different kind of response. He had recorded the SUV's plates earlier when they pulled up. He emailed the footage to a local private security firm and to a community attorney he'd tracked down. The emails had alerts. Possible trespass. Potential assault. Please respond, the lawyer called back immediately. The security firm activated a strategy to be on site fast and to document everything. Within minutes that felt like an hour, 2 unmarked security cars swept into the street. Flashing beacons, not police, but official-looking. The men who'd come to intimidate saw them and panicked. They split. One tried to run. Another dropped his tools and dove into an SUV. Ryan moved like a shadow himself. He was outside the back door before they reached the cars. He grabbed one of the men by the collar, spun him, and pinned him to the ground with an arm around his neck. Firm, controlled, and non-lethal. "You brought guns," Ryan said into the man's ear. "You drew down on my family. You will be held accountable." The man's bravado evaporated. He stammered, "We were told. The board told." But the words trailed off under Ryan's steady grip. The private security arrived and secured the scene. They took statements. They recorded everything. They photographed license plates and faces. They did what the HOA's hired muscle should have done correctly: document, de-escalate, and report. The HOA men got arrested that night, not by uniformed officers but by the consequences that followed from being exposed. They left in cuffs hours later after actual police arrived with the security firm's recorded footage in hand. The footage showed them trespassing. It showed the man who'd once worn a fake badge patting the pistol at his hip. It showed them trying to force a confrontation. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that next morning. You could see the panic in their notes. The lead at the meeting spoke in clipped sentences on a loop. Policy, enforcement, community safety. But the words had no force anymore. Documents were scattered on the table like a thin shield. They tried damage control. They filed counterclaims against us claiming harassment and provocation. They issued their usual fines. They sent a stern letter to Ryan calling him disruptive. They looked to law to protect them. But law had a way of looking at evidence. And evidence, captured in clear camera angles and recorded audio, does not bend to bullying. Ryan didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He moved through it like a man who knows violence is a tool, rarely a victory. He shared the footage with the district attorney. He handed over the timeline, the names, and the sequence. He marked the HOA board members who'd authorized the earlier cop stunt. He traced emails. He assembled a paper trail that showed intent. The neighborhood reacted. People who had been silent suddenly found their voice. Witnesses stepped forward. A neighbor uploaded a video of the black SUV circling the block earlier that day. Another neighbor produced a message thread from the HOA app with threatening tones. Faces that had been neutral turned red with regret. The board scrambled. Its leaders, who had once smiled at power, now sat in defensive huddles. Insurance lawyers advised them to cease enforcement actions. Local press called for comment after someone tipped off a reporter. The story spread in hours. HOA intimidation, the headline read. The board could not control it. They tried to reframe it as misunderstandings. That didn't stick. In the end, the first major blow to the HOA came not from physical force but from exposure. They had used fear. Ryan returned the favor, but with facts. He turned their theater of intimidation into a court-ready record. Late that night, after the arrests and the press calls, Ryan sat across from me at the kitchen table. He breathed out, finally allowing the tension to leave his shoulders. "It's not over," he said. "But tonight they learned limits." I asked, "Do you regret going that far?" He looked at me, flat and honest. "No, they pointed a gun at my family. They forced my hand. I don't want anyone to think they can do this and walk away." You could see the shift in neighbors. Some avoided us still. Others, quietly, came over with casseroles and notes. They admitted they had been afraid to speak up. They said they'd feared being targeted. Ryan listened, nodded, and kept the conversation short. He wanted the focus to stay on accountability, not on him. By dawn, the HOA had lost more than a night of dignity. They had lost control. Their men sat for booking photos. Their legal team wrote apologies that were as thin as paper. The board would spend months in litigation, and some members would resign under pressure. They had underestimated a family and a system that could hold them to account. But the wounds remained. Streets heal slowly. Trust does not return overnight. Ryan knew this. He also knew that victory here wasn't about humiliation. It was about stopping harm. He had set a clear boundary. He had made the cost of crossing it tangible. As the neighborhood tried to find normal again, Ryan started to prepare for what the board might do next. He would keep records. He would keep his guard up. He would make sure the cameras stayed on, and somewhere in those files and photos and notes, a new kind of peace took shape. One built on proof, on the truth laid bare, and on the knowledge that some threats stop when they meet real consequences. The morning after the failed intimidation, the neighborhood was buzzing, but Ryan remained calm. He had anticipated the HOA would try one last move, a final push to assert control, regain pride, and intimidate anyone who dared defy them. But Ryan was ready, and this time he had evidence, witnesses, and strategy on his side. By noon, 2 SUVs arrived carrying the HOA board members themselves. No fake uniforms, no discreet intimidation squads, just 6 men, dressed formally, carrying documents, cameras, and a few phones. They were here to assert authority, confident that their board power could override reality. Ryan met them at the front door. Calm, measured, every muscle relaxed, but ready. "Board of the HOA," he said. "I assume you know why I'm standing here?" The lead member shifted uncomfortably. "We're here to resolve matters peacefully, to clarify procedures." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Clarify? You sent a fake cop with a loaded weapon at my son's chest. You sent men to intimidate our family. You violated multiple laws. Clarification is no longer enough. You'll answer for that." The men fidgeted, papers shuffling in their hands. They weren't expecting confrontation like this, especially not from someone who looked calm but radiated authority. Ryan had spent years disarming enemies, reading threats before they materialized. Their bluff would fail here. He stepped aside to let the cameras inside capture everything. "This property is monitored. Everything you do, say, or attempt will be recorded. You have one chance to leave peacefully before legal action begins." The lead board member swallowed hard. We have authority," Ryan interrupted, voice low and unwavering. "Authority does not include trespass, assault, or intimidation. I suggest you leave now, or the consequences will be immediate and documented." The air hung thick. The board members glanced at each other, unsure how to proceed. Their previous attempts had failed, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Ryan had all the proof: surveillance footage, witness statements, vehicle logs, and the physical evidence of their hired intimidation squads. Suddenly, one of the men made a move, trying to push past Ryan. In a fluid motion, Ryan intercepted, blocking and guiding him back, firm but non-lethal, signaling control. Cameras captured everything. The board member froze, realizing that physical intimidation wouldn't work. Ryan calmly pulled out his phone, streaming live to a private legal consultant and sending the live feed to the local district attorney's office. "This is your last warning," he said. "Every step you take beyond this point is being documented and reported in real time." Faced with the undeniable proof and the weight of the law closing in, the HOA board retreated. Not one of them dared argue further. They left their vehicles, cameras, and documents behind in a hasty exit, humiliated and powerless. By evening, the legal repercussions began. The board received notices of trespassing, intimidation, and assault charges. Their insurance advisors recommended immediate cessation of any enforcement activity, and a few board members tendered resignations under pressure. Local media picked up the story. HOA intimidation foiled by Special Forces family, headlines screamed. The neighborhood buzzed with relief, admiration, and shock. Ryan didn't celebrate loudly. He didn't post about his victory on social media. He simply went through the house, checking doors, cameras, and sensors one last time. "It's done," he said quietly. "They've learned the limits." They'll think twice before anyone else is targeted. Neighbors began cautiously approaching, thanking us for standing up. Witnesses who had been silent before came forward with accounts of intimidation, hoping their statements would prevent similar incidents. Local authorities commended Ryan's careful documentation and his restraint, noting that the HOA had exposed itself through reckless escalation. By the end of the week, the HOA was a shadow of its former self. Policies were revised, aggressive enforcers were removed, and the board members who had authorized the initial attacks faced legal consequences. The neighborhood slowly began to heal, but a new respect for boundaries and accountability had been cemented. Ryan finally sat back in the quiet of our living room. "Power," he said, "is only effective when people respect the consequences behind it. Some never learn until it's too late." I nodded, exhausted but grateful. "You kept us safe. You didn't need to use violence to do it." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes preparation, proof, and presence are enough. People learn fast when they realize their actions have real consequences." The neighborhood returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such a confrontation. But for Ryan and our family, one truth remained. Boundaries had been set. Threats had been neutralized. And for anyone who doubted the cost of aggression, the lesson had been made clear. We didn't just survive. We prevailed. The HOA had paid the price. And the family that had once faced intimidation was stronger, safer, and more respected than ever. The end.